He reached the crest and saw movement below. 3 riders circling a small cabin near the edge of the frozen timberline. Their torches glowed orange against the snow. He recognized the place. Old Martha Pierce's homestead. She was near 80, half blind, and still refused to sell her land. God help her, Eli muttered. He kicked Copper forward. The horse responded instantly, surging down the slope, hooves thudding over the frozen ground. As they neared the cabin, a gunshot cracked the stillness. Splinters flew from the porch railing. Eli ducked low in the saddle and swung the rifle up. He fired once, then again. One rider fell, tumbling into the snow, the torch spinning from his hand and dying in the drift. The other 2 turned, startled. "Turner!" one shouted. "You got no business here!" "Looks like you made it my business," Eli growled. The men spurred their horses. Copper charged headlong toward them. The clash was fast and brutal, a blur of snow and sound. Eli fired again, grazing one man's shoulder and sending him spinning out of the saddle. The last rider pulled up short, dropped his torch, and bolted back toward the ridge. When the silence returned, Eli could hear the soft crackle of fire catching along the porch beam. He jumped from the saddle, kicked snow onto the flames, and flung open the door. Inside, Martha Pierce sat at her table, a rifle across her knees, eyes sharp despite the years. "I figured that was you shooting, Eli Turner," she said. "Knew you weren't fool enough to stay quiet forever." "You all right, Martha?" "Better than the bastards outside." He helped her to her feet. "They were Rourke's men. You'll need to leave the valley." "I was born here," she said, stubbornness like iron in her voice. "Ain't leavin' because some rich vulture wants my water." Eli knew arguing was useless. "Then lock the doors and keep that rifle close." As he turned to leave, Martha caught his sleeve. "You bring that monster down, Eli. For all of us." He tipped his hat and stepped back into the cold. Copper waited near the porch, ears pricked toward the ridge. From up there, the faint hum of machinery reached them, a sound out of place in this valley of quiet farms. Eli followed the noise until the trees thinned, revealing a new structure clinging to the hillside. A metal tower with pipes running from its base into the frozen creek. Fresh tracks led to it from the mining road. He dismounted, crouched behind a boulder, and studied the operation. 3 workers in heavy coats shoveled something from barrels into the water trough, thick, dark sludge that hissed as it touched the ice. Beside them stood a man in a bowler hat, giving orders. Eli recognized him from the newspaper in town. Harlan Pike, Rourke's foreman and enforcer. If Pike was here, it meant the poisoning wasn't rumor anymore. It was fact. He raised the rifle, aiming for the barrels. A single shot shattered the first, spilling the black liquid across the snow. The workers panicked, shouting, scattering for cover. Pike drew his revolver and fired blindly toward the ridge. Eli ducked and fired again, hitting the second barrel. It burst open, the foul stench of chemicals flooding the air. Pike cursed and ran for his horse. Copper stepped forward, restless. Eli slung the rifle and grabbed the reins. "Come on, boy. Let's end this." They galloped downhill, snow exploding under their hooves. Pike saw them coming and swung onto his mount, spurring hard. Eli leaned low, chasing him along the narrow trail that wound between the rocks. The 2 men rode neck and neck for 100 yards before Pike's horse stumbled, sending the foreman tumbling into the drift. Eli dismounted, rifle trained. "It's over, Pike." Pike glared up, his face smeared with snow and sweat. "You think killing me changes anything? Rourke's already won. He's bought the sheriff, the bank, half the church." "Maybe," Eli said. "But he hasn't bought me." Pike spat blood, then smiled a slow, cruel smile. "Then you're already dead." Before Eli could react, Pike struck a match and tossed it behind him. A trail of oil flared across the snow, racing toward the barrels on the hill. The explosion that followed tore the air apart, a bloom of orange and black that rolled through the valley like thunder. Eli was thrown backward, the blast knocking the breath from his chest. Copper reared and screamed, then bolted a few steps before circling back to him. Eli staggered to his feet, ears ringing. The tower was on fire, flames climbing its steel frame. Through the heat shimmer, he saw Pike limping toward his horse. Eli raised the rifle again, but the man disappeared into the smoke. He turned away, coughing, and climbed onto Copper's back. They rode down the slope, the sky above them now bruised with smoke. The smell of burning oil clung to his coat, bitter and metallic. When he reached the valley floor, he saw the creek again, its once clear water now streaked with black. His stomach twisted. This was what Rourke was doing to Pine Hollow, choking it slowly, one poisoned stream at a time. He looked toward the horizon, where the town's steeple cut a thin line against the sky. Somewhere there, Sheriff Wade still wore a badge that meant nothing. Somewhere, Rourke sat behind a polished desk, calling this destruction progress. Eli tightened his grip on the reins. "Not anymore," he said under his breath. "Not while I'm breathing." Behind him, the burning tower collapsed, sending a plume of smoke curling toward the clouds, a signal fire that could be seen for miles. Copper turned his head at the sound, eyes catching the orange glow. Eli reached down, stroking his mane. "You did good, boy," he said softly. "But this is just the beginning." And as the first flakes of a new storm began to fall, the valley trembled under the weight of what was coming next. By the time Eli reached his ranch, the air was thick with the smell of smoke and snow. His hands were raw from the rains, his coat stiff with frozen sweat. The fire from the tower had already died down in the distance, but a column of ash still drifted like a ghost above the ridge. Every part of him ached. His arms from the recoil, his chest from the blast, and somewhere deeper, the hollow pain that came with knowing he had just made himself an outlaw in his own valley. He slid from Copper's back and led the horse inside the barn. The animal's coat shimmered with sweat, steam rising from his flanks. Eli rubbed him down with a handful of burlap, whispering, "You did good, boy. You did what no man could." But Copper's ears flicked uneasily. The horse's instincts were sharper than any rifle sight, and Eli could feel the tension rippling under the hide. "What is it?" he murmured. Then he heard it too, the low rumble of wagon wheels grinding through snow, coming up the lane. Eli grabbed the rifle and stepped to the window. Lantern light glowed through the swirling snow. A wagon was approaching, 2 horses pulling a covered rig, the sheriff's badge painted faintly on the side. Sheriff Wade climbed down first, stamping snow off his boots. He looked older than Eli remembered, eyes tired, beard heavy with gray. Beside him stood 2 deputies, men Eli didn't recognize. Wade called out, "Turner, you here?" Eli stepped out, rifle slung casually, though both men knew it wasn't for show. "I'm here," he said. "If you came for coffee, you're out of luck." "I came for questions," Wade replied. "The Smelter Hill's burning, and Rourke's saying you started it." "Rourke's a liar," Eli said evenly. "You know that." "I know he's the one signing my paycheck," Wade said quietly, "which means I can't afford not to ask." They faced each other in the wind, 2 men carved from the same land, now standing on opposite sides of its ruin. Eli's jaw tightened. "If you believed him, you'd already have your gun out." The sheriff sighed, glancing toward the barn. "You got company here, Eli?" "Rourke claims one of his men went missing. The engineer, Simon Dyer." Eli didn't flinch. "Haven't seen him." Wade's eyes searched his. "You always were a poor liar." "Then quit asking questions you already know the answer to." For a moment, the only sound was the storm whispering over the fields. Then Wade's voice dropped low. "I can't protect you anymore. The warrant's coming down from Helena. They'll call this arson, maybe murder. If they find that engineer on your land, they'll hang you both." Eli looked past him to the deputies. One of them shifted nervously. The other kept his hand near his holster. He wasn't here for questions. He was here for a body. "You said you can't protect me," Eli said slowly. "But you came anyway." "Why?" "Because once I believed you'd never stop fighting for what's right," Wade said. "Don't make me regret remembering that." The words hit harder than any accusation. Eli lowered the rifle slightly, snow collecting on the barrel. "Then do what you came to do." Wade's shoulders sagged. "Give me time. I'll delay the paperwork, make it look like you fled. But you need to disappear for a while. Take that horse and whatever you've got left, head north through the timberline before dawn." "I can't run," Eli said. "If I do, the valley's lost." Wade stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "It's already lost, Eli. I've seen the contracts. Rourke owns half the wells and all the cattle routes. He's got men in every seat that matters." "Then maybe it's time somebody reminded him he doesn't own everything." The sheriff met his eyes for a long moment, then nodded once. "You always were a stubborn bastard. God help you." He turned to leave, then paused. "I never saw you tonight. You understand?" Eli watched the wagon disappear into the white. The faint sound of hooves faded, leaving only the moan of wind through the fence boards. He returned to the barn. Simon was awake, propped up against the stall wall, face pale but alert. "I heard him," Simon said. "The sheriff." "Yeah," Eli answered. "He's not our enemy, not yet. But he won't be able to stand between us and Rourke much longer." Simon coughed, wincing. "Then we make a stand. First, we survive the night." He poured water into a tin cup and handed it over. Copper watched from his stall, calm now but still restless, muscles twitching with unspent energy. The horse seemed to sense the tension in both men, shifting his weight, blowing softly through his nostrils. "What happens when they find this place?" Simon asked. "Then I'll do what I've done my whole life," Eli said. "Fight with what I've got, and pray the rest holds." Simon looked toward Copper, a faint smile crossing his face. "Then you've already got more than most men." Eli sat on the edge of a hay bale, silent for a moment. "When I left the marshal's office 15 years ago, I told myself I'd had enough of other people's battles. But this," he gestured toward the valley outside, "this is different. It's home." Simon nodded. "Home's worth bleeding for." Before Eli could answer, Copper's head shot up. His ears pricked, muscles tensed. The horse let out a low, throaty sound, not fear but warning. Eli moved to the window. A lantern glowed faintly down the road, weaving between the trees. Another, then another. At least 4 riders this time. "They're coming," Eli said. Simon reached for his revolver, but his hands shook too badly to load it. Eli placed his hand over the young man's shoulder. "Save your strength. I'll buy us time." He led Copper out into the yard and patted his neck. "If I don't make it, you take care of him," he told Simon. "Not a chance, Kamasu," Simon said. "You're both walking out of this." Eli smiled grimly and turned toward the road. The riders fanned out, their horses' hooves crunching in the snow. The lead man raised his lantern, shouting, "Turner, by order of the territorial court, you're under arrest." Eli called back, "You'll have to come get me." A moment of silence. Then gunfire split the night. Bullets tore through the yard fence, splinters flying. Copper bolted sideways, neighing loudly. Eli fired twice in return, dropping one of the attackers from his horse. The others dismounted and spread out behind the corral. Simon crawled to the barn door, loading his revolver one-handed. "Eli!" "Stay down!" Eli shouted. The fight raged for what felt like an hour, but was barely 10 minutes. When the smoke cleared, 2 men lay in the snow, and the rest had fled back down the road. The yard was torn with hoof prints and broken boards. Eli leaned against the fence, chest heaving, breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Copper limped slightly, but stood tall, eyes burning in the dark. Simon staggered from the barn. "They'll be back, with more men." Eli nodded. "Then we need to move him." He pointed toward the ridge. "There's an old trapper's cave by the north line. We'll rest there until daylight." They packed quickly, maps, rifles, and the canister of evidence. Copper carried most of the weight without complaint, stepping carefully through the deepening snow. The wind howled like a living thing, chasing them up the trail. When they reached the cave, Eli built a small fire and sat beside the horse, running a hand down his neck. "You're all we've got between us and death, boy," he said softly. Copper lowered his head, eyes reflecting the firelight. Eli leaned back, exhaustion creeping in. Simon slept beside the flames, his injured arm wrapped tight. For the first time in a long while, Eli felt something like peace, not because the fight was over, but because it had finally begun. Outside, beyond the ridge, Pine Hollow burned in scattered places, barns, fences, and hearts. The storm returned, snow falling thicker now, covering the tracks of every man still alive. And through it all, the Mustang kept watch, standing guard against the dark. Snow fell thick and relentless through the night, muffling every sound but the wind's low moan across the ridge. The fire burned low, throwing orange light over the cave walls. Eli Turner sat near the mouth, rifle resting on his knee, watching the storm swirl down the valley. Simon slept fitfully beside the flames, the fever still clinging to him like shadow. And Copper, the horse that had somehow become both guardian and companion, stood just beyond the firelight, his breath curling into the cold air like smoke from a living forge. Eli hadn't meant to sleep, but exhaustion took him in pieces. He drifted in and out, mind tangled in flashes of memory. His wife's laughter near the creek, the mining siren the night it all collapsed, the screams swallowed by dust. When he jerked awake, the fire had nearly gone out. He stirred it back to life, feeding it with small twigs. That's when Copper's ears twitched. The horse let out a low rumble, the kind that meant danger. Eli froze, listening. It wasn't the wind. This sound was rhythmic, measured, deliberate. Hooves, more than one set. He shook Simon awake. "They've found us." Simon blinked through the haze of fever. "Rourke's men?" Eli nodded. "Most likely." Simon reached for his revolver, but Eli stopped him. "You can't fight in that state. I'll draw them off." Simon gritted his teeth. "You'll get yourself killed. Maybe. But you getting caught helps no one." Eli grabbed his coat and slung his rifle over his shoulder. "You know the trail to Dr. Hill's place?" Simon nodded weakly. "When the shooting starts, you ride north. Take Copper. He knows the way. Don't stop until you see her lantern." "I'm not leaving you behind." Eli met his gaze, calm but hard. "You don't have a choice." He moved to Copper's side, running a hand down the horse's neck. "You take care of him, you hear? Don't let him fall." The Mustang snorted softly, as if he understood. Outside, shapes began to form through the snow. Riders, their lanterns flickering like fireflies. Eli counted at least 6. They were cutting slow circles through the drifts, scanning the ridgeline. The storm had worked in his favor. The tracks from the night before were buried, but the smoke from their small fire might have betrayed them. Eli crouched behind a rock and waited. When the lead rider passed within 50 yards, he raised the rifle and fired once into the air, drawing attention to himself. "There!" a voice shouted. He fired again, this time at the ground near the rider's horse. The men shouted, scattering, returning fire blindly. Eli dropped behind the rocks, snow exploding around him as bullets tore through the drifts. He crawled along the ridge, fired once more, then rolled down the opposite side toward the gully. Behind him, the riders cursed and followed, their lanterns swinging wildly in the storm. It worked. He had their attention. At the cave, Simon struggled to his feet. "Now," he whispered to Copper. The horse lowered his head, and Simon used the saddle horn to pull himself up. The pain nearly made him black out, but he stayed upright. He clicked his tongue softly. "Go, boy." Copper obeyed, moving carefully through the snow until he found the trail leading north. The wind stung Simon's face like knives, but he kept low, trusting the Mustang's sure steps. Behind them, the gunfire grew distant. Eli ran until his lungs burned. The gully opened into a frozen creek bed, the surface slick with a thin glaze of ice. He knew this land better than most men knew their own faces. There was a narrow cut in the rocks just ahead, a place where he could disappear if he was lucky. But luck had been scarce lately. A shot cracked past his ear, splintering a branch inches from his head. He dove behind a boulder, returning fire. 2 riders had managed to flank him, one high on the ridge, another weaving through the trees below. Eli took a deep breath, steadied his aim, and fired. The lower rider toppled from his horse, vanishing into the snow. The second one turned his horse sharply and retreated. Eli didn't wait to see if they'd regroup. He scrambled up the ridge, moving toward higher ground. Snow soaked through his coat, and the wind howled louder now, carrying the sound of more hoofbeats in the distance. He was running out of time. By the time he reached the tree line, his legs felt like lead. He slumped against a pine trunk, chest heaving. From here, he could just make out the faint line of Copper's trail winding north through the storm. Good. The horse was fast and smart. They might still make it. Then a shout cut through the wind. "Turner!" The voice was rough, familiar. Caleb Finch. Eli turned and saw him at the base of the ridge, rifle raised, his face ghost pale against the snow. "You can't run forever," Caleb called. "You're done." "Not yet," Eli muttered. He fired once, aiming wide, forcing Caleb to dive for cover. Then Eli turned and ran again, deeper into the trees. He needed distance, just enough to lose them until morning. Hours seemed to pass. When the gunfire finally stopped, only the sound of the wind remained. Eli stumbled through a stand of aspens, every breath a knife in his chest. His vision blurred, the world narrowing to the crunch of his boots and the white glare of the storm. At last, he found shelter in an old trapper's shack, half buried in snow. The door creaked open, revealing a single room, dusty, cold, but standing. He collapsed inside, barring the door behind him. For a long time he sat by the cold hearth, shivering, listening for the sound of pursuit. None came. He took out his wife's silver locket, rubbed it between his fingers, and whispered a prayer he hadn't said in years. By dawn, the storm had begun to clear. Through a narrow window, Eli saw the first thin line of sunlight breaking over the horizon. Somewhere out there, Simon and Copper were still moving north. Maybe they'd reached Clara. Maybe they hadn't. He pushed himself to his feet, feeling older than he ever had. Outside, the snow glittered like a sea of glass. He stepped into it, boots crunching softly, and began the slow walk back toward the valley. As he reached the ridge, he stopped short. Smoke was rising again, but not from the smelter this time. It was from his ranch. Eli's heart dropped. He could see the dark column twisting into the pale sky, hear the faint echo of distant shouts carried by the wind. Rourke's men had come back, and they were finishing what they'd started. He stared for a long moment, fists clenched, jaw tight. Then he turned north, following the faint tracks Copper had left in the snow. If Simon and the horse were alive, They had one chance left, and Eli Turner was done running. He vanished into the storm, a lone figure against the vast white, the echo of hoofbeats fading into silence behind him. The wind bit at Eli Turner's face, carving lines of pain across already weathered skin. He kept moving north, each step sinking into the snow up to his knees. Every breath came out ragged, each one carrying the weight of too many ghosts. Behind him, Pine Hollow burned, a dark smear against the dawn. He didn't look back. He couldn't. By mid-morning, the storm eased into a gray calm. The air was so still that every sound, the creak of his boots, the crack of branches under frost, felt louder than it should. He followed the trail Copper had cut hours earlier, hoping the horse's instincts had kept Simon alive. The Mustang's tracks were clear at first, strong and sure. But the farther he went, the more they scattered and overlapped. The storm had chewed them into confusion. Then he saw it. Dark stains where snow should have been pure. Blood. Eli's chest tightened. He knelt, brushed his glove over the frozen patch, and felt the rough crust where blood had melted the snow and then refrozen. More spots followed in a winding line toward a thicket of pine. The prints were lighter there, Copper's stride uneven, favoring one side. "Easy, boy," Eli whispered into the cold, though the horse was nowhere in sight. "You just hold on." He moved carefully through the trees until he saw a glimmer of movement up ahead. The shape of a horse half collapsed against a fallen log. Copper. Steam rose from his flank where blood had clotted along a long, shallow crease. A bullet grazed by the look of it, but deep enough to drain him. Eli dropped to his knees beside him. "Damn it, Copper," he breathed. "You weren't supposed to be the one bleeding." Copper turned his head, eyes dull but still aware. The horse tried to rise but failed, trembling. Eli stroked his muzzle. "Don't move, you hear me? You got him this far, that's enough." A weak voice came from behind the log. He didn't stop Eli. Not once. Simon. The young man was slumped against the trunk, pale and shaking, his left arm useless and his coat soaked with melted snow. He was alive, but barely. Eli felt something crack inside him, a mix of relief and fury. "You're a damn fool, both of you." Simon smiled faintly. "Guess that makes 3. Eli shook his head. "You need a doctor. Clara's place can't be more than 5 miles from here." "She'll have company," Simon said. "Rourke's men came through at dawn. I saw their torches from the ridge." Eli cursed under his breath. "Then we find another way." He tore open his pack, pulling out a strip of bandage and his last bit of whiskey. "This'll burn," he warned, cleaning the wound on Copper's flank. The horse flinched, but didn't fight him. Simon watched, silent, as Eli worked, hands steady, heart not so much. "You talk to that horse like he's a man," Simon said finally. Eli tied off the bandage. "He's got more sense than most I've known." Copper let out a slow breath, as if in agreement. The air filled with a kind of fragile peace, the kind that never lasted long in the valley. It broke a moment later. Gunfire echoed from the east, sharp and close. Eli froze, every instinct snapping awake. The sound of men shouting followed. Simon's voice was hoarse. "They're hunting us." "Not us," Eli said, standing. "Me." He looked down the slope where faint figures were emerging through the fog. 4 of them, riding hard. One wore a long black coat. Caleb Finch. Eli chambered around, eyes narrowing. "You stay with Copper. If anything happens—" "I'm not leaving," Simon interrupted. Eli cut him off. "That wasn't a question." He moved downhill fast, using the trees for cover. The snow muffled his steps, but not the pounding in his chest. When he reached a cluster of rocks overlooking the draw, he raised the rifle and waited. The riders spread out, careful now, the way men did when they knew the land could bite back. "Turner," Caleb's voice carried over the wind. "You can't hide forever. Hand over the engineer, and maybe Rourke lets you live." Eli shouted back, "You tell Rourke the land doesn't belong to him, and neither do its people." The reply was a rifle shot that tore bark from the tree beside him. He ducked, returning fire. The shot struck one of the riders square in the chest, knocking him clean off his horse. The others scattered, taking cover behind boulders. Another bullet whined past, grazing Eli's shoulder. Pain flared hot, but he gritted his teeth and fired again, forcing them back. Caleb shouted orders, but the wind swallowed his words. When he rose to move positions, Eli's next shot clipped his hat clean off his head. The former ranch hand ducked low, cursing. Then the world cracked open. A flash of orange light erupted from the base of the ridge, followed by a thunderous blast. Snow and dirt rained down as the edge of the slope gave way. Eli stumbled, half-blinded. He hadn't seen the dynamite buried there until it was too late. The shockwave hurled him backward into the snow. When the ringing in his ears faded, he heard the whinny, a cry of pain that cut straight through him. Copper. He scrambled up, ignoring the blood soaking his sleeve, and sprinted toward the sound. The Mustang was on his side, tangled in the fallen branches, thrashing weakly. Caleb stood nearby, revolver drawn. "Move and he dies," Caleb said. Eli stopped cold. "You shoot him, you'd better reload quick." Caleb smirked. "Rourke doesn't want the horse. Just you and the boy." "You always were good at doing other men's work," Eli said. Caleb hesitated, just long enough. Copper surged upward suddenly, slamming his shoulder into Caleb's side. The gun went off, the bullet ripping across the horse's neck, a spray of blood marking the snow. Eli tackled Caleb before he could fire again. They rolled through the drifts, fists flying. Caleb was younger, stronger, but Eli fought like a man with nothing left to lose. When it ended, Caleb lay face down in the snow, breathing but broken. Eli staggered to his feet, clutching his ribs, and went to Copper. The horse stood trembling, head low, blood pulsing from the wound. Eli pressed his coat against it, whispering, "Stay with me, boy. Don't you dare quit now." Copper's legs shook, but he stayed upright. Simon limped into view, half-frozen, eyes wide. "Eli, I know," Eli said, voice rough. "We have to move. They'll bring more." He looked down at Caleb, unconscious but alive. For a moment he thought of finishing it, ending one more threat. But something in him stopped. Maybe mercy, maybe exhaustion. Either way, he couldn't cross that line again. Instead, he took the man's revolver and tossed it deep into the snow. "You tell Rourke the land fights back," he muttered. They left the ridge together, Eli walking beside Copper, one hand steadying the horse, the other gripping his rifle. Behind them, the trail was a mess of red and white, proof of what it cost to stay alive. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, the sky had begun to clear. A thin band of sunlight cut through the clouds, landing on Copper's face. The horse blinked, exhaled, and leaned into Eli's shoulder. "We're not done yet," Eli whispered. He looked north, toward the hills where Clara's cabin would be, and began the slow climb. Every step left a mark of blood on the snow, and everyone carried the weight of what came next. By the time Eli Turner and Simon Dyer reached the tree line overlooking the upper valley, the sun had vanished behind a wall of gray clouds. The air was sharp and brittle, heavy with the promise of another storm. Eli's hands were numb around Copper's reins. He could feel the horse's body trembling, each breath a visible plume of pain. The bandage on Copper's neck had already darkened with fresh blood. "Just a little farther," Eli whispered, his voice rough from wind and worry. "Hold on, boy." Simon stumbled behind him, half delirious from cold and exhaustion. "Do you even know where we're going?" "North Ridge," Eli said. "Dr. Hill's cabin sits near the spring. If she's alive, she'll help us. The path narrowed as they climbed, winding between black pines heavy with snow. Every branch sagged under the weight, releasing showers of white when Copper brushed past. The horse's steps slowed but never faltered. Eli stayed close to his side, one hand on the fuel, animal's shoulder like an anchor keeping both of them upright. When they reached the crest, the valley opened below, a frozen sea of white stretching toward the faint outline of Cedar Falls. Smoke still rose from the southern end, where Rourke's men had burned ranches to ash. It looked peaceful from a distance, but Eli knew better. That smoke meant ruin. Simon swayed, catching himself on a rock. "You should leave me," he said hoarsely. "You'll move faster without me." Eli turned, anger flashing in his eyes. "Don't say that again. You and that horse got me into this fight, and I'll be damned if I walk out without both of you." Simon tried to smile, but his lips were too cracked to manage it. "You don't owe me anything, Turner." "Maybe not," Eli said, "but I owe this land something." A low rumble rolled through the sky, thunder, though the storm hadn't broken yet. The sound echoed through the mountains like cannon fire. Eli looked east, where dark clouds were swallowing the ridge. "We need shelter," he said. They found it in a half-collapsed line shack near the base of a cliff. Inside, it smelled of damp wood and old tobacco. Eli got a small fire going with what dry timber he could find. Copper stood just outside the doorway, refusing to lie down even when Eli tried to coax him. The Mustang's eyes followed every movement, alert despite his wounds. Simon sank near the fire, shaking uncontrollably. "How much longer do you think we have before Rourke sends more men?" "Less than a day," Eli said. "He's too greedy to let us disappear." Simon looked into the flames, his voice barely audible. "I used to believe men like him could be stopped with laws and evidence. Now I see it's never been about justice. It's about who's willing to stand their ground." Eli stared into the fire with him. "Law's just paper. Men make it mean something." Outside, Copper gave a restless snort. Eli rose and stepped into the cold. The snow had started again, big, heavy flakes drifting in slow spirals. He ran a hand down Copper's neck, feeling the warmth beneath the coarse hair. "You saved us once," he said softly. "I might need you to do it again." The horse's ear flicked toward him, and for a moment, Eli swore Copper understood. Then, from far below in the valley, came the faint clang of metal, hoof on frozen stone. More than one. Eli crouched low, listening. The rhythm was wrong for travelers. It was too controlled, too cautious. He looked back into the shack. "They found us." Simon forced himself up. "How many?" "Enough." Eli tightened his coat and checked his rifle. "Get on the horse." Simon blinked. "He can't carry us both. Not like this." "He'll carry you. I'll keep them busy." Simon's face twisted with frustration. "Eli, don't argue. The evidence, the map, the negatives, they're all that matters now. You get them to Clara, she'll find Sheriff Wade. Maybe he's still got some fight left." Simon hesitated, then nodded. "You'll follow?" "If the Lord's kind." Eli helped him mount Copper. The Mustang grunted as the weight settled on his back, but stood steady. Eli gave the horse's neck a final pat. "You know where to go, boy. Don't stop for anything." The sound of riders grew louder. Shadows flickered through the snow below, lanterns swinging like fireflies in the dark. Eli took a deep breath, raised the rifle, and fired the first shot. The echo cracked across the valley like lightning. The riders scattered, shouting. Eli ducked behind the stone wall as bullets shredded the wood above him. He returned fire, hitting one horseman square in the chest. Another bullet grazed his shoulder, spinning him sideways. He gritted his teeth and fired again. "Go!" he shouted. Copper bolted into the storm, snow exploding under his hooves. Simon clung to the saddle, guiding him north through the trees. The horse's stride lengthened with every step, blood from his wound scattering like red mist against the white. Eli stayed behind until the magazine ran dry. When he finally broke from cover, 3 men were already climbing toward the shack. He turned and ran uphill, snow dragging at his boots, lungs burning. The ridge narrowed ahead into a rocky pass. He slipped between 2 jagged stones just as another volley of shots tore through the air. A bullet caught his leg, dropping him to one knee. He crawled the rest of the way, using the rocks for cover. When he turned, the riders were closing in, Caleb among them, his face pale and furious. "Turner!" Caleb shouted. "You're finished!" "Maybe," Eli muttered, "but so are you." He drew his last cartridge, chambered it, and aimed low, not at the men, but at the overhang above them. The shot struck true. The ridge groaned, then collapsed, sending a cascade of snow and rock crashing down. The avalanche swallowed the trail in an instant, cutting Caleb and his men off. Eli dragged himself higher until the noise faded. When he reached the crest, he collapsed against the snow, gasping for air. Blood ran warm down his thigh. The sky above had turned to steel gray, and snowflakes fell so thick he could barely see. He didn't know how long he lay there, half conscious, before he heard it. The faint sound of hoofbeats again. Slower this time, steady and deliberate. Copper. The Mustang emerged from the storm, carrying no rider. Simon was gone, but the horse had returned, sides heaving, eyes wild with fear. Eli pushed himself up, heart pounding. "Where is he, boy?" Copper whinnied, pawing at the snow, then turned back the way he came. Eli followed, limping through the drifts until they reached the edge of the ravine. Below, tangled in the branches of a fallen pine, lay Simon's body. For a moment, everything went still. The storm, the wind, even the ache in Eli's leg. He climbed down carefully, each step heavier than the last. Simon's eyes were closed, his face peaceful, almost boyish in the pale light. The saddlebag still hung from his shoulder. Inside, the canister of negatives glinted faintly. Eli pressed a hand to the young man's chest. No breath, no heartbeat. He swallowed hard. "You got us this far," he whispered. "That's enough." Copper stood above them on the ridge, snow collecting on his mane. Eli took the canister and tucked it inside his coat. "We finish this together, you and me." The wind howled again, fiercer than before. The storm had broken for real now, erasing every track behind them. Eli climbed back to the ridge, grabbed Copper's reins, and turned toward the faint glow of Cedar Falls on the horizon. The Mustang hesitated for a moment, then started forward through the blinding snow, and behind them, the mountain swallowed the last evidence of Simon Dyer, leaving only red stains fading under the falling white. Eli Turner didn't remember how long he rode that night. The snow came down harder, thick and wet, erasing the trail faster than he could make it. Every mile felt like 3. The wind screamed through the trees, clawing at his face, but he kept his head down and let Copper guide the way. The horse limped, bleeding through the bandage, but his pace never faltered. Both man and animal moved like ghosts through the storm, bound by the same stubborn will, the need to finish what Simon had started. By dawn, the storm broke. The horizon glowed with a bruised light, pink and gray, and the valley below shimmered beneath a sheet of ice. The wind had quieted to a whisper. Smoke rose from Cedar Falls in thin black ribbons. Eli could see the town now, small, weary, half-buried in snowdrifts. The sound of hammers echoed faintly. People were rebuilding after the fires Rourke's men had set. But even from a distance, Eli sensed something wrong. Too quiet. Too neat. He's reached the edge of town near the frozen creek. Copper stopped on his own, ears forward, sensing what Eli already saw. 2 riders waiting near the bridge. Both wore the long dusters of Rourke's company guards. One of them dismounted and held up a hand. "Turner," the man called. "You're under arrest for destruction of company property, aiding a fugitive, and murder of a deputy. Sheriff's orders." Eli smiled grimly. "That's so, then where's the sheriff?" The man nodded toward the courthouse in the center of town. "Inside, waiting for you." Eli nudged Copper forward. "Then I guess it's time we had ourselves a talk." The guards watched him ride past, but didn't follow. Maybe they were afraid. Maybe they already knew this day wouldn't end the way Rourke planned. The courthouse was the tallest building in Cedar Falls. 2 stories of red brick and pride built when the valley still believed in law. Now it looked hollow, the flag above it hanging limp in the still air. A line of townsfolk had gathered outside, silent, faces gray with fear and curiosity. When Eli dismounted, the crowd parted. He walked through them with slow, steady steps, his rifle slung over his shoulder, his hat pulled low. Copper stood behind him, steam rising from his nostrils. Inside, the air was thick with heat from the potbelly stove. Sheriff Wade sat behind his desk, the badge on his chest tarnished, but still shining faintly. And beside him, leaning against the wall, was Nathan Rourke. His black coat was spotless, his gloves crisp. He looked like a man carved out of confidence and sin. "Mr. Turner," Rourke said smoothly, "I've been expecting you." Eli's eyes flicked to Wade. "That true?" Wade's face was lined with exhaustion. "He showed up at dawn, said he was taking over the case. I didn't have much say in it." "Always the same story," Eli said. "Men with power talk, and the rest of us listen." Rourke smiled, all teeth. "I'm here to make you an offer, Turner. You walk away, today, right now, and I'll let this town live. I'll rebuild your ranch, give you twice what it's worth. No more blood." Eli laughed once, dry as desert wind. "You think money fixes what you've done?" "It fixes everything," Rourke said. "It always has." Eli stepped closer, boots thudding on the wooden floor. "You poisoned our water. You burned homes. You killed Simon Dyer." Rourke's expression didn't change. "Accidents happen in progress." "Progress?" Eli's voice rose. "You call murder progress?" Rourke tilted his head. "You can't fight the future, Turner. The land's got more to give than grass and cattle. We're the ones smart enough to take it." Eli's gaze dropped to the desk between them. The evidence canister weighed heavy inside his coat. He pulled it out, set it down, and rolled it across the wood until it stopped in front of Rourke. "That's your future," he said. "Everything you've done, caught on film. Chemical tags, signatures, contracts, all of it. Dyer died for this. You think the governor won't care?" Rourke's eyes flickered for the first time. "You think anyone in Helena's going to believe a washed-up rancher over me?" "That's why I didn't bring it to them," Eli said. The door opened behind him. Sheriff Wade stepped forward, rifle raised. But not at Eli. He aimed it at Rourke. "I've seen enough," Wade said quietly. "I may be old, but I ain't blind. You lied to me, Nathan. Told me this was about keeping order." Rourke's calm cracked, just slightly. "Put that gun down, Sheriff. You don't know what you're doing." "Oh, I know," Wade said. "I'm remembering what it means to wear this badge." The room tensed. The stove popped loudly, making everyone flinch. Rourke moved first, reaching for the pistol at his hip, but Eli was faster. His rifle came up, barrel steady. "Don't," Eli warned. Rourke froze, eyes locked on him. "You shoot me, you'll be no better than I am." Eli's finger tightened on the trigger. "Difference is, I won't sleep through it." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Wade spoke. "Eli, the people are watching. Let the law handle it." Eli looked through the open door, saw the crowd outside. Farmers, mothers, children, all staring in. The valley, broken and waiting for something to believe in again. He lowered the rifle slowly. "Then the law better start doing its job," he said. Wade stepped forward, cuffs in hand. "Nathan Rourke, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and murder." Rourke didn't fight. Maybe he knew there was no escape left. As Wade led him out, the townsfolk parted again, murmuring. For the first time in years, Cedar Falls felt the weight of justice settle back into its bones. Eli followed them outside. The light had changed. The clouds parting, the first rays of sun catching the snow and turning it to gold. Copper stood nearby, watching him. His bandaged neck glistened with frost. When Rourke was loaded into the wagon, Wade turned to Eli. "You did what most men wouldn't. The valley owes you." Eli shook his head. "Don't owe me a thing. Just take care of the land. Don't let it fall to men like him. Again." Wade nodded solemnly. "You leaving?" "For a while," Eli said. "There's still one more thing I have to do." He mounted Copper, who pawed the ground impatiently. As they started up the hill, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of pine and thawing earth. The storm was gone. The valley stretched out before them, clean and bright, waiting for spring. Behind him, the church bell rang once, steady, strong, alive. And for the first time in years, Eli Turner let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, peace could grow again in Pine Hollow. The thaw came late that year. It began as a whisper, snow softening at the edges, water trickling through the ditches again, birds testing their voices in the cold dawn. The valley, battered but alive, was learning how to breathe once more. Eli rode the ridge at sunrise, Copper moving slow but sure beneath him. The Mustang's wounds had healed to a silvery scar along his neck, the only mark left from the long winter's war. Down below, the land stretched wide and clean, ridges glowing gold where sunlight struck through the clouds. Smoke rose from chimneys again, but this time it was the good kind, the kind that meant breakfast, not burning. He stopped where the trail overlooked his ranch, what little was left of it. The barn was half gone, the house nothing more than a skeleton of charred beams. But the soil around it was dark and rich, and for the first time in months, the creek behind it ran clear. Eli swung down from the saddle, walked to the fence and let the quiet settle in. "Not much to come back to," he murmured. Copper flicked an ear, snorted once and leaned his head close. Eli smiled faintly, running a hand along the horse's muzzle. "You're right. It's enough." He spent the morning rebuilding the corral, hammering boards salvaged from the barn into something that would hold through spring. The rhythm of it, strike, breathe, strike, felt steadying. Honest work had a way of doing that, grounding a man after too much chaos. Around midday, a shadow crossed the field. Eli looked up to see Sheriff Wade riding toward him, a second horse in tow. The sheriff dismounted stiffly, old injuries catching up with him, and handed Eli a folded envelope sealed in red wax. "From the governor," Wade said. "Word travels fast these days. Seems your friend Simon Dyer's evidence hit the right desk after all." Eli opened it carefully. The letter was short, a formal commendation for his service to justice and the protection of territorial citizens. Below the signature, in neat script, was a final note. "The people of Wyoming owe you their gratitude." Eli stared at it for a long time, then folded it back up. "You can tell the governor I'm not much for medals." Wade chuckled. "Didn't think you were, but there's more. He's offering you a post, territorial marshal for the Northern District. Said it was time the law was in the hands of someone who remembers what it's supposed to stand for." Eli leaned against the fence, squinting toward the mountains. "I hung that badge up once, Sheriff. Didn't figure I'd live long enough to put it back on." Maybe it's not about you, Wade said gently. Maybe it's about the folks who need to see that some men still stand for something. Eli didn't answer right away. The wind moved through the grass like a sigh. From the road behind them came the clatter of hooves. Clara Hill rode into view, her dark coat flaring behind her, medical satchel slung across her saddle. She waved when she saw them. "Figured I'd find you up here, Turner." "Doc," Eli said, tipping his hat. "Didn't expect company." "You didn't expect to survive the winter either, and here you are." She dismounted, nodding toward Copper. "How's my patient?" "He's tougher than both of us," Eli said. She smiled, brushing a hand along the horse's neck. "I've been riding through the valley. People are talking, Eli. About you. About what you did." He looked away. "I didn't do it for talk." "I know," she said softly. "But sometimes that's how change starts. With talk. They're building again, planting again. They believe they can stay." "Rourke's men?" "Gone. His company's finished. The federal marshals took him east for trial last week." Wade adjusted his hat. "Won't lie. I'll miss seeing that man's face when he realized money couldn't buy him out of a cell." Eli chuckled once, a low, dry sound. "Justice in Pine Hollow. Never thought I'd see the day." Clara studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the badge on Wade's chest. "You'll take it again, won't you?" Eli looked between them. The sheriff, the doctor, the land that had nearly killed him, but also kept him alive. "Maybe for a while," he said. "Long enough to make sure nobody poisons the water again." "That's all any of us can do," Wade said. He climbed back onto his horse, adjusting his coat. "I'll head to town. They're holding a gathering tonight. Folks want to thank you. Maybe even celebrate a little." "Tell them I said thanks," Eli replied. "But I'll stay here. Feels right." Wade smiled knowingly and rode off down the trail. When he was gone, Clara stood beside Eli at the fence. "You know, not every man gets a second chance," she said. "Guess I never figured I'd need one." She smiled faintly. "Everyone needs one." They watched the valley for a long time without speaking. Below them, children's laughter drifted from the town, carried by the wind. It mixed with the sound of hammers and saws, the pulse of life returning after too much silence. Finally, Clara turned to go. "You'll come down soon?" "Maybe tomorrow," Eli said. "I owe someone a visit." When she was gone, he walked back to the barn where Copper waited. The Mustang pawed the dirt, restless. Eli saddled him slowly, then led him out toward the hill where the snow still lingered. At the top stood a single pine tree and a small wooden cross, half buried in the melt. He dismounted, brushed the snow away, and knelt. "Simon Dyer," he said quietly. "You did what most men wouldn't. You kept faith when the rest of us forgot how." He took the folded letter from his coat and placed it at the base of the cross. "This belongs to you more than me." Copper lowered his head, blowing warm air over Eli's shoulder. The sound was soft, almost like a sigh. Eli smiled, patting his neck. "Yeah, I know, boy. Time to go home." They rode back down the hill in the golden light of late afternoon. The snow had finally begun to melt for good, rivers of clear water running beside the road. The air smelled of cedar and damp earth, of life returning. When they reached the rebuilt bridge at Willow Creek, Eli stopped and looked back one last time. The valley spread wide behind him, green pushing through the white, roofs shining in the sun. "Looks like you got your piece after all," he said to Copper. The horse snorted, flicking his ears toward the horizon. Eli smiled. "All right then. Let's see where the road takes us next." They crossed the bridge together, man and horse moving steady into the light. The last of the snow fell away behind them, leaving only the sound of the creek, clean, clear, and alive again. And somewhere in that wind, faint but certain, came the voice of the land itself whispering that maybe, just maybe, Pine Hollow was finally free. And somewhere in that wind, faint but certain, came the voice of the land itself whispering that maybe, just maybe, Pine Hollow was finally free. If this story found its way into your heart tonight, tell me what you felt, even if it's just a 0 or a 1 down in the comments. I read every single one, and if you'd like to ride with me again through tales of the old frontier, of courage, loss, and the kind of quiet redemption only the West can bring, make sure you're subscribed. There's another story waiting just beyond the next ridge. One stormy night, in the lonely valley of Pine Hollow, a broke rancher named Eli Turner heard a wounded horse crying outside his barn. When he opened the door, the animal looked straight at him, then turned as if asking him to follow. He did. And that single step into the blizzard would uncover a secret buried for years, a truth that would test the last bit of mercy and justice left in the Wild West. Snow drifted down like ashes from a dying fire, covering the valley of Pine Hollow in a heavy white silence. The night had the kind of stillness that pressed against the windows and made a man feel truly alone. Inside the weather-beaten ranch house, Eli Turner sat by the stove, its orange glow fighting a losing battle against the cold. He'd long stopped keeping track of time. Out here, the only clock that mattered was the rising and falling of the wind. Then, through the howling gusts, came a sound that didn't belong to the storm, a low, broken cry, half whinny, half groan. Eli froze. He hadn't heard a horse in weeks. His own two had died the previous winter, one to sickness and the other to hunger. What he heard now sounded hurt, desperate. He pulled on his coat, grabbed the lantern, and stepped into the storm. The wind clawed at him immediately, slicing through wool and skin. Snow blinded his path, but there it was, a dark shape staggering near the corral fence. The creature's breath came out in clouds of white steam, its flank streaked with something darker than snow. Blood. The horse, big, chestnut, and scarred, dragged one leg as it limped toward him. Its eyes were wild at first, but when Eli stopped a few feet away, the animal halted too, shivering. Then it did something that made his heart stumble. It pressed its head against the barn door, nudging the latch as if begging to be let inside. Eli hesitated. The barn had been shut for months. He'd boarded it up after losing his last mare. He couldn't bear to see the empty stalls. The boards groaned under the storm, and for a long moment he stood there, watching the horse's sides rise and fall in the lamplight. Finally, he reached out and unlatched the door. The hinges moaned as he pushed it open. The scent of old hay and dust rolled out, mingled with the sharp tang of iron and winter air. The horse stepped back, turned its head toward him once, eyes wide, almost pleading, and then looked into the darkness beyond the doorway, as if telling him to follow. Inside, the barn was a tomb of wood and shadow. Cobwebs hung like silk veils from the rafters. The floorboards creaked under his boots. His lantern's light found the outlines of old tack, cracked leather, and tools long since rusted. Then he noticed something new, hoofprints half frozen in the dirt, leading deeper in. "Easy now," Eli murmured, his voice low and gravelly from years of disuse. The horse followed, limping, leaving a faint trail of blood on the packed earth. When they reached the back stall, the animal stopped suddenly. It whinnied once, a sharp, urgent sound, and then pushed its nose toward a pile of straw. Eli lifted the lantern higher. For a second, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. Beneath the straw lay a shape, human, motionless. A man. His coat was torn, caked in mud, the color of iron dust. Snowflakes clung to his hair, melting slowly in the lantern's heat. One arm was twisted wrong, his face pale as the frost outside. "Lord above," Eli muttered. He set the lantern down and knelt. The man was alive, barely. There was a weak flutter at his throat, a ghost of a pulse. His fingers clutched something inside his coat. When Eli pried them open, he found a folded piece of thick paper, slick with blood. On it was a map of the valley, rivers, ridges, and at the very center, his own land marked in red. Eli looked at the injured stranger, then at the horse. The animal stood over them both, eyes fixed, ears flicking at every sound. It wasn't just guarding, it was waiting. A sudden gust blew the barn door wider, scattering snow into the lantern light. Outside, faint but distinct, came the rhythmic thud of hooves. More riders. Eli snatched the lantern down, covering the flame with his hand. The injured man stirred and whispered something. A single word, raspy and broken. "Water." The horse nickered softly, lowering its head beside him, as if trying to calm him. Eli's heart pounded. Who was this man? Why had the horse led him here? To his barn, of all places. And what was marked on that map? He could see lanterns bobbing in the distance now, moving through the white darkness, riders coming fast down the ridge road. Whoever they were hunting. The wind carried a shout he couldn't make out, then another. He realized he had only minutes before they reached the gate. Eli looked down at the man again, then at the horse whose breath came in short clouds of steam. Against every instinct for self-preservation, he dragged the stranger deeper into the shadows, behind the hay bales, and threw a blanket over him. The horse followed, its body shielding them both. The riders stopped outside. Through a crack in the barn wall, Eli saw two silhouettes, men with rifles slung over their shoulders, scanning the property. "You check the barn," one called. "He couldn't have made it far." Eli held his breath. The horse's muscles trembled against his arm, but it didn't move. The doorknob rattled once, twice, then fell still. A moment later, the hoofbeats faded back into the storm. When the silence returned, Eli finally exhaled. The horse lowered its head again, brushing his shoulder. Its eyes glimmered like embers in the dark. "What did you bring to my door?" he whispered. Outside, the wind roared against the valley walls, and the lantern's flame flickered, throwing their shadows across the boards. One man, one wounded animal, and a secret neither yet understood. Eli set the lantern on a nailhead, jutting from a post, and knelt again by the stranger. The man's skin was the gray of old tin, lips cracked, a crust of snow still melting along his hairline. Eli eased open the torn coat and found a badge-shaped patch stitched to the lining, a simple brand in red thread. Rourke Mining and Waterworks. The sight of that name made something small and hard tighten in Eli's chest. Rourke had a way of getting into places he didn't belong, into deeds and wells and men's business. "Stay with me," Eli said, not sure who he was talking to. The stranger's breath rattled, caught, and settled. Eli worked the sleeve up over the wrong bent arm and hissed through his teeth. The fracture was ugly, but not open. He tore a strip from the man's coat tail, fashioned a cradle, and pulled the arm gently into place. When he tied the knot, the stranger's eyes flew open, pale and storm-colored. "Water," he whispered again. Eli grabbed a dented pail from beneath the feed bin, knocked ice from the rim of the stable trough, and dipped for what sloshed beneath. He steadied the man's head and tipped a little to his lips. The stranger coughed once and swallowed like it hurt. His hand came up then, searching his chest, and Eli slid the folded paper into his fingers. It seemed to ground him somehow. He opened it weakly and stared. "Can you talk?" Eli asked. A nod, barely. "Simon," he said. "Simon. Dyer." "All right, Mr. Dyer," Eli muttered, more to himself than to the other man. "You made it to the wrong barn if you were looking for help. This place barely keeps me." The horse stood rigid beside them, listening with its whole body. In the lantern glow, Eli could see him clearer now. Big-chested and raw-boned, winter coat clumped with sweat and snow. A long scrape ran along the near hindquarter, hair peeled away in a ragged seam. Close to the skin, thin wire had cut and left angry scabs. He'd seen that kind of bite on fence-bound cattle, but this pattern, industrial, not ranch. The horse flicked an ear when Eli reached a hand. He held still, waited, aloud. "You've carried more than you should have," Eli murmured. "I know the feeling." He found a jar of salve left from better days and rubbed it into the angry flesh. The horse shivered but did not pull away. Eli checked the hooves next, lifting each with care. The left fore was hot and swollen, where a crooked shoe had bruised the frog. Whoever had nailed it had done so in a hurry or with a cruel hand. Eli's jaw clenched. "I'm going to call you Copper," he said softly. "Color fits, and you look like you've been pulled from the ground and hammered into shape." Copper blew a tired breath over his hat brim, a warm fog that smelled of winter hay and iron. Simon tried to prop himself on one elbow and winced. He held the map up where the lantern could find it. The paper showed Pine Hollow like a man might see it from the ridge. Dark veins of creek and draw, the broken lines of fence and trail. Along the rivers, someone had scribbled numbers, arrows, small skull marks. A red X sat in the middle of Eli's acreage with the words, "Test well, Phase 3. "You know what this is?" Simon asked, voice thin. "I can guess," Eli said. "Rourke's running out the clock. Snowmelt will push everything into the valley. Easier to say nature did the damage." He closed his eyes, breath frosting the air. "They've been mixing brine from deep shafts, dumping at night. The horses won't drink. Folks have started getting sick. Rourke says the valley water's tired, and his pipe water's the cure. But he's the one making it sick." Eli stared at the map until the lines blurred. He thought of his wife's laugh under the old cottonwoods by the creek, of a boy's small boots on the porch, of a night when sirens sang at the mine and a world folded like paper. He had spent 3 winters trying not to think. Now thoughts came like a flood. "Why bring this here?" he asked finally. "Copper brought me," Simon said. His eyes slid to the horse. "He knows the roads, knew where the riders were, knew to hide. I just held on." Eli swallowed. He rose, rummaged through a crate until he found a clean sheet and an old army blanket, and spread both over the stranger. Wind boomed along the boards, and a fine powder of snow fell through chinks in the siding, turning the lantern's light to a halo. Copper shifted closer to Simon until the man's shoulder touched warm ribs. Hoofbeats came again, fainter now, high up along the ridge road. Eli eased to the wall and put his eye to a crack between the planks. 2 rider shapes were indeed moving away, but a third figure stood farther off, still as a fence post. A small glint sparked above the figure's shoulder, then died. Glass, catching lightning, maybe a field glass or a rifle scope. Eli stepped back and let out a slow breath. "We're not alone," he said. Simon's hand tightened on the map. "They won't stop. Rourke's got men in the sheriff's office, the assessor's desk, maybe even the preacher. But not Dr. Hill. She wouldn't sell." "Clara Hill?" Eli asked, surprised. "She's still in practice?" "Stitches ranchers, foals mares, keeps records she doesn't share." Pain crawled across Simon's face. "She tested water last month, told me to run this to Helena, to the state office. I didn't run fast enough." Eli debated, then nodded once. "I'll send for her." He crossed the barn, took down an old saddlebag, and pulled out a signaling lantern he hadn't touched since his boy's branding day. He struck a match, coaxed a small blue flame, and covered it with the tin cap. Then he opened and closed the slat 3 times, east, toward Dr. Hill's place, pausing between each flash the way she had taught the valley in fire season. The hill wind swallowed the light, but if Clara was anywhere near her kitchen window, she'd know who was calling. When he turned back, Copper had lowered himself to his knees beside Simon, breath slow and steady, big head resting on a bale. It was a strange, holy picture. A busted man, a battered horse, and a barn too stubborn to fall down. Eli dug a clean feed bucket from the rafters, lined it with straw, and worked at warming a mash on the stove by the tack room. Oats, a little molasses, a splash of hot water. When he set it down, Copper lifted his head and ate with careful gratitude, the way a good horse does when he knows he shouldn't take more than he needs. Simon studied Eli through the steam of his own breath. "You were a mine hand once," he said. "It wasn't a question. I can see it in the way you tie a knot without thinking." "A long time ago," Eli answered. "You lost someone," Simon added, voice softer still. "That's the only kind of grief that can live in a man this long." Eli didn't answer. Words were for easier nights. The wind dropped for a moment. In that quiet, the barn ticked and sighed. Somewhere under the eaves, a drip started, a melt line working its way toward the floor. Eli pulled the blanket higher under Simon's chin and checked the sling again. The man's eyes had grown clear enough to track him. "If I don't make it," Simon said, "take the map to Sheriff Wade. If he won't listen, take it to Clara. If she won't—" "She will," Eli said. Simon nodded. "Then burn the copy in my coat. There are names on it. Folks who signed when they were afraid. If Rourke sees it intact, he'll make examples." Eli slid his hand into the inside pocket and felt another folded sheet. He didn't take it out. He just patted the place once, like a promise. "Copper saved me," Simon whispered. "He ran when the fuse lit. I don't know who said it. Might be Rourke, might be the foreman. All I know," he coughed, winced as the movement jogged his arm. "All I know is the water ran black that night." A pale band of sky showed through a knothole above them, the kind of light that means the moon is up there somewhere, even if the clouds won't allow it. Eli stood to stretch the cold from his knees. He felt the barn like a living thing, the way the boards flexed under wind pressure, the way the old beams leaned into one another. He knew how much weight each nail would bear. He knew where a man could hide and where he could see. He went back to the crack in the wall. The ridge man was still there, a dark stick against darker snow, watching. The glass gleamed again and vanished. Eli pictured the path from that ridge to his yard, the fence gap by the cottonwood stump, the wash where the snow drifted to a man's waist, the way the barn roof shed powder on the north side but held it on the south. He measured panic and threw it away. Panic would not help him make it to morning. He turned down the lantern wick until the light was barely more than a heartbeat. He checked that the door bar would lift smooth if he needed it to, that the stall latch would not squeal, that his old Winchester still held cartridges. Then he pulled a wool blanket over Copper's withers and draped another down Simon's legs. "If somebody knocks," he said, "you don't move, you don't answer. You let me carry the lying." Simon smiled with half his mouth. "You're good at it?" "I've had to be." They sat like that for a while, saying nothing, listening to the weather work on the world. When the wind rose again, it came with a grit to it, as if the storm had chewed stone on the ridges and brought the taste down. Eli felt the night crawl along his nerves. He thought of the figure on the ridge, of glass catching light like a cat's eye. He wondered how many men Rourke had hired and how many good men had looked away. A minute later, something new found the barn. No sound, just a pulse of brightness that slid across the rafters, faint as a breath. Eli frowned and looked up at the knothole. The pulse came again, then steadied, a small, fixed glimmer against the high darkness, west toward Dyer Ridge. Not just a watcher, a signal. Someone on the ridge was talking to someone else in the valley, using light the way he had used it. Eli's stomach went cold. He tightened his hand around the lantern handle, felt the metal bite. The glimmer winked once, twice, 3 times in slow, measured intervals, and then held steady like a star that hadn't been there a heartbeat before. He wasn't the only one with a code in Pine Hollow. Eli's mind worked fast, measuring danger the way a man once measured a blast line in a mine. How close he could stand before it all came down. Someone up there on Dyer Ridge was signaling to someone below, maybe to the 2 riders who had come earlier, maybe to someone watching right now. He moved quietly to the barn window, careful not to let the lantern's dim light spill through the cracks. The ridge light blinked twice more, then died. The valley returned to darkness, thick, endless, cold. He waited, listening. No hoofbeats yet. Only wind and the occasional creak of wood shifting under snow weight. Behind him, Copper exhaled heavily, and the sound almost covered the crunch of boots on ice outside. Eli turned, instinct taking over. He snatched the lantern wick low and drew the Winchester from its rack. A moment later came a voice, half buried in the storm. "Evenin', Turner. You up?" He recognized it instantly. Caleb Finch. Used to be his hired hand before Rourke bought half the valley and started paying men more for silence than for labor. Eli stayed still. Another voice followed, rougher, impatient. "Doors barred. You sure he's in there?" "Only light in the valley," Caleb answered. "That old fool don't sleep easy." Eli's jaw tightened. He leaned to the stall. "Stay quiet," he whispered to Simon, "and keep Copper still." Simon nodded weakly. The horse seemed to understand. It pressed against the back wall, breathing slow, eyes bright in the gloom. The latch rattled once, twice. Snow slid off the roof, heavy and muffled. "You mind if we come in, Eli?" Caleb called, tone almost friendly. "Got word of a thief running through the flats. Thought maybe he'd come this way." Eli stepped forward, rifle at his side. "Ain't seen no one," he said through the wood. "Funny," said the second man. "Tracks lead straight here. 3 sets of hooves. One of 'em bleeding." Eli's throat tightened. He looked back. Copper's trail still stained the barn floor. He hadn't had time to cover it. "I found an injured Mustang," Eli said, forcing calm. "Dragged itself out of the draw. Brought it in. That's your blood." "That's so?" The other man laughed low. "We'd best check then. Rourke don't like his property wandering off." "Since when does Rourke own the wild?" Eli said. "Since he bought the water they drink," Caleb replied. A silence stretched, just the wind and the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone loading a chamber. Eli's finger brushed the rifle trigger, but he didn't raise it yet. Killing wasn't survival unless you meant to carry the cost. "You two best move on," he said evenly. "Storm's thickening, barn's full of sickness and ghosts. Nothing worth dying over." Caleb chuckled. "Always were one for stories." Snow scuffed outside. One shadow crossed the cracks of light, then another. They were circling. Eli stepped back from the door and whispered to Simon, "If they come in, you stay down. Don't matter what happens." Simon tried to rise, but pain chained him to the hay. "You'll never fight them both." "I don't have to. Just have to keep them guessing." He blew out the lantern. The barn went black except for the gray shimmer of snow seeping through the boards. The door creaked. A beam of lamplight from outside sliced through, then vanished as the door swung wide. Caleb entered first, holding a pistol, eyes straining. The second man followed, heavier, coat buttons glinting. Eli's voice came from the dark. "Told you. Ghosts." Then the horse moved. Copper lunged, not in panic but with precision, slamming a shoulder against the stall gate. The wooden bar snapped like dry bone. In the confusion, Eli swung the rifle butt hard across Caleb's wrist. The pistol clattered to the floor. The other man fired wild. A spark, a deafening echo. The shot buried itself in the rafters. "Enough!" Eli barked. "Drop it and walk out, or next one splits the difference between your eyes." The second man froze, chest heaving, gun still half raised. Through the open door behind him, lightning flashed across the valley, painting everything white. Eli saw his face then. Young, frightened, hired, not hateful. Caleb gritted his teeth, cradling his wrist. "You don't know what you're up against, Turner. Rourke's got deeds for every well from here to the ridge. He owns the law. You get in his way, you'll end up like the rest." Eli said nothing. His finger stayed firm on the trigger. "Come on," the younger man said to Caleb, voice shaking. "Ain't worth it." Caleb spat on the floor, turned, and left first. The younger followed, head down. When their shapes disappeared into the snow, Eli kicked the door shut and dropped the bar. His heart drummed against his ribs like a warning bell. Behind him, Copper nickered softly. Simon pushed himself up on one elbow. "You can't bluff them forever," he said. "I ain't bluffing," Eli answered. "Just buying the night." Simon managed a faint smile. "You're stubborn." "Been called worse." He relit the lantern, its glow trembling over the damage. The bullet hole smoked in the rafters, snow drifting down through the splinter. He could smell powder and burnt pine. The air felt tighter now, as if the barn itself had been marked by violence again. Eli found a shovel and covered the blood streaks on the floor with fresh straw. He patched the gate with a spare plank. Copper watched each movement, ears twitching. When Eli came close, the horse pressed its muzzle to his shoulder, breath warm through his coat. "You did good," Eli murmured. "Real good." Simon leaned back against the stall post. "You knew one of them." Eli nodded once. "Caleb Finch. Worked this place with me 2 summers back. Didn't think he'd sell out that fast." "Rourke pays in more than money," Simon said quietly. "He pays in fear." Eli didn't reply. He just tightened the lantern wick and went to the door. The storm had settled into a steady whisper, snow falling vertical now instead of sideways. Across the valley, a faint orange glow flickered against the clouds, the direction of the old smelter. Fires again, maybe burning waste, maybe warning. He remembered Caleb's words. Rourke owns the law. And he thought of Sheriff Wade, decent once, now silent about too many things. He turned back inside. "When that arm holds steady, you'll ride to Dr. Hill. She's the only one who might prove what's in that water." Simon closed his eyes. "If she's still free to speak, then we'll make sure she can." Eli hung his coat by the stall and sank to the floor beside Copper. The horse lowered its head until their foreheads touched. A gesture of trust Eli hadn't earned, but would take all the same. He could feel the animal's heartbeat through the wood. Steady. Alive. Tomorrow, the valley would know he'd harbored Rourke's fugitive. Tomorrow, there'd be no peace, but tonight, there was warmth in the barn again. Faint, fragile, human. Outside, snow covered every track, erasing what had happened, what was coming. But the light on the ridge would burn again soon. Eli Turner didn't sleep that night. He sat on a bale of hay with the Winchester across his knees, watching the slow rise and fall of Simon's chest and the steady, patient breath of Copper. The storm outside had lost its fury, leaving only the hiss of snowflakes melting against the roof. It should have been peaceful, but every gust of wind felt like it carried the footsteps of men he couldn't see. Just before dawn, a faint knock sounded from the direction of the feed shed. 3 taps, a pause, then 2 more. It wasn't random. That was Dr. Clara Hill's signal, the one used by neighbors when telegraph lines were down. Eli rose quietly, pushed the barn door open, and squinted through the gray-blue light. Clara stood at the edge of the yard, wrapped in a heavy wool coat, scarf pulled tight. She looked smaller than he remembered, but the eyes, sharp, steady, were the same. In her hands she carried a leather satchel and a lantern covered with a red cloth. "You couldn't pick a worse night to invite company," she said, voice muffled by the scarf. "I wasn't sure the light got through," Eli replied. "It got through," she said, stepping into the barn. When she saw Simon lying in the straw, she drew in a breath. "Lord Eli, what have you gotten into?" "Didn't ask for it," he said. "Just opened a door for a horse." Clara knelt beside Simon, her gloved hands moving with practiced speed. She unwrapped the splint Eli had made and whistled softly. "You did this yourself?" "I've set a few bones in my day." "You did fine," she said. "He'll keep the arm, but he's weak. Fever's close." She looked up at Eli. "Who is he?" Simon stirred, eyes fluttering open. "Name's Dyer," he whispered. "Rourke's company. Clara held a finger to his lips. "You can tell me after I save your life." She turned to Eli. "Boil water. I'll need clean rags, alcohol, and whatever blankets you can spare." Eli obeyed, glad for something to do. The simple rhythm of preparing things kept his mind from spiraling into the fears that had followed him all night. When he returned, Clara was cleaning the wound on Simon's ribs, her face drawn tight in concentration. "Bullet graze," she said. "He's lucky. Missed the lung by an inch. Whoever shot him meant to kill." Copper shifted nearby, blowing through his nostrils. The horse's flank twitched as Clara's lantern light passed over him. She looked up and froze. "Dear God," she murmured, standing. "What happened to this horse?" "Barbed wire," Eli said. "Not ranch wire," she replied. She traced the old scabs along Copper's side, fingers gentle but firm. "This is cut steel, industrial fencing, same kind used at Rourke's mining pens. He's been through a gate meant to keep people out." Copper turned his head toward her, eyes wide and alert. She stroked his muzzle. "Smart boy, aren't you?" "He brought Simon here," Eli said. "Led him through the storm." Clara met Eli's eyes, something flickering in her expression. "Animals sense things," she said softly. "Sometimes they know where it's safe long before we do." She went back to Simon, pressing a cloth against his wound. The smell of antiseptic filled the barn, mingling with the earthy scent of hay and horse sweat. Eli watched her work, the sure movements, the calm in her voice. Years ago, she'd tended his wife after a fall from the corral fence. Back then, Clara's hands had trembled. Now they were steady as iron. Simon's voice broke the silence. "They'll come again," he said. "The ridge light means they're moving before sunrise. Rourke wants that map. If he gets it, the whole valley's gone." Clara frowned. "Map?" Eli handed it to her. She unfolded the blood-stained paper and studied it in the lantern light. Her brow furrowed deeper with each line she read. "These markings," she whispered. "They match my water tests. The wells on this line all showed chemical trace, but I never told anyone where." "Looks like somebody found out," Eli said. Clara folded the map carefully. "If he's right, they're dumping runoff into the water table. The valley's been complaining about sick livestock for months. Now I know why." Simon tried to sit up, grimacing. "They'll blame nature. Then they'll sell us their purified water." "Rourke's got no use for the valley once he owns the land," Eli said. "He'll drain it and move on." Clara stood, her face pale but determined. "You can't fight him alone, Eli. Sheriff Wade—" "Wade's compromised," Eli interrupted. "He's turned quiet about too many things." "Then who?" she asked. Eli looked at Copper, then at Simon. "Maybe the truth itself is enough." Before Clara could answer, a loud crack split the morning. A gunshot, far off but echoing through the valley. All three froze. Copper lifted his head, ears forward, muscles tense. "That came from town," Clara said. "Sounded like Main Street." Eli checked the rifle. "Could be Rourke's men sending a message." Simon clenched his jaw. "Or a warning. They know I'm alive." Clara turned to Eli, urgency rising in her voice. "You can't keep him here. If they find out you're harboring him, you'll hang with him." "I know," Eli said. He felt the weight of it, another choice he hadn't asked for but couldn't turn away from. "I'll hide him at the old smokehouse by the creek. They won't search there until they run out of barns." "I'll help," she said. Together they wrapped Simon in blankets and eased him onto a makeshift sled Eli had used for hauling hay. Copper watched, then stepped forward and gripped the rope in his teeth, tugging gently, as if offering to pull. Clara smiled despite the fear. "He understands more than most men I've met," she said. They moved slowly through the thinning snow, following the creek bed to the smokehouse, a squat stone building half buried under drifts. Inside it smelled of hickory and cold earth. They laid Simon on a cot and covered him with blankets. Clara handed Eli a small tin of powder. "Dissolve this in water, for fever. And keep that horse close. If the riders come, he'll know before you do." Eli nodded. "What about you?" "I'll head back before they notice I'm gone," she said. "If Rourke's men see me here, they'll know you're not alone." He wanted to stop her, to keep her safe, but he knew she was right. She met his eyes before leaving. "Eli, be careful. The kind of men who poison land don't hesitate to poison people." When she disappeared into the white horizon, the valley seemed to shrink around him. The snow had stopped, but the air carried a weight heavier than storm. Back at the barn, Eli found Copper standing near the door, staring toward the ridge. The horse's nostrils flared, muscles twitching under his hide. "What is it, boy?" Eli whispered. Copper stamped once, twice, then turned sharply, bumping Eli's shoulder with his head. The gesture was urgent, almost commanding. Eli followed his gaze. On the far slope, faint but clear against the morning gray, another light flared. 3 quick flashes, then one long. The same code repeated. This time, though, the signal wasn't just a warning. It was a call. And whoever was answering it was already on the move. Eli watched the ridge light fade into the morning mist. The snow had stopped, but the valley hadn't softened. Everything still felt brittle, sharp-edged, the kind of cold that cracked wood and men alike. He turned from the open barn door and glanced at Copper, who stood poised like a soldier on guard, the moon. Horse's ears twitched toward the hills, nostrils flaring, waiting for a danger Eli couldn't yet see. He loaded his rifle, not because he wanted a fight, but because a man learned long ago that trouble didn't wait for an invitation. Then he pulled on his coat and started down the creek bed toward the old smokehouse where Simon lay hidden. When he reached the stone structure, the smell of damp ash still hung in the air. Inside, the fire he'd lit for warmth was down to a faint orange glow. Simon slept fitfully, face gray, breath shallow. Eli knelt beside him and checked the wound. It hadn't reopened, but fever had begun its climb. He mixed the powder Clara had given him into a cup of melted snow and coaxed it past Simon's lips. For a while there was only the soft sound of wind slipping through the cracks and Copper's hooves shifting in the snow outside. Then Simon stirred, his voice rough and low. "They're coming sooner than I thought." Eli leaned closer. "How do you know?" "The ridge light," Simon said, eyes half open. "It's Rourke's way of calling his men in. Every flash pattern means something. That one means cleanup." He coughed, the effort tearing at his chest. "They think I'm dead, but they won't risk anyone finding what I carried." "You mean that map?" Eli said. Simon shook his head weakly. "Not just the map. There's something else. In my coat. Inside the lining." Eli reached into the heavy wool jacket and felt a hard lump sewn into the inner hem. With his pocket knife, he cut the thread and pulled free a small tin cylinder, no bigger than a man's thumb. He unscrewed the cap and tilted it. A roll of photographic negatives slid into his palm. "What's on these?" "Proof," Simon said. Pictures of Rourke's pumps, his barrels marked with the same chemical symbols Clara found in her tests. Enough to bury him in front of a federal judge, if anyone gets to see them. Eli's stomach knotted. And if they don't? Then the valley dies a slow death. First the animals, then the wells, then us. The words hung in the cold air like frost. Eli slid the film back into the canister and tucked it deep into his coat pocket. He didn't trust many things in the world anymore, but he trusted his own hiding places. Outside, Copper stamped a hoof and let out a low, warning nicker. Eli moved to the door and peered out. Down the slope, faint against the white field, 2 riders were approaching from the ridge. He recognized one by the way he sat a horse. Caleb Finch again, Rourke's loyal hound. The second man rode a pale gray mare with a rifle strapped to the saddle. Eli turned to Simon. "They're here." Simon tried to push himself up, but his arm trembled. "Don't fight them, Eli. Not yet. You can't win head-on." Eli's jaw set. "Not planning to. Just buying time." He pulled a tarp over Simon, covered him with old sacks of feed, and slipped outside. Copper followed, close behind, his breath steaming in the frigid air. They crossed behind the smokehouse and circled toward the barn, staying low where the drifts were thick. From behind the collapsed fence, Eli watched the riders stop at the yard. Caleb dismounted first, scanning the ground. He bent, picked up something from the snow, a scrap of cloth torn from Simon's coat, and cursed under his breath. "He was here," Caleb said. "You smell that horse? Same one from last night." The other man spat into the snow. "Rourke wants him alive?" Caleb nodded. "Alive long enough to talk. After that, it don't matter." Eli's pulse thudded in his ears. He needed to draw them away from the smokehouse. He looked at Copper, whose muscles trembled with contained energy. "You still got one run left in you, boy?" he whispered. The horse snorted softly, as if he'd been waiting for that question. Eli stood, whistled once, sharp and clear. The sound carried across the yard like a gunshot. Both riders jerked their heads toward the barn. Copper took off, pounding across the open field, hooves throwing snow in glittering arcs. Caleb shouted and spurred his horse. The other man followed, rifles slung, chasing the flash of copper hide through the gray dawn. Eli waited until they were halfway down the valley before running back to the smokehouse. Simon was struggling to his feet. "What was that?" "Distraction," Eli said. "Copper's buying us a few minutes. He'll get killed. Not if I can help it." They left the smokehouse, moving through the shallow wash toward a cluster of cottonwoods. The trees offered little cover, but they hid the trail leading to the frozen creek. There, under a fallen log, Eli uncovered a small wooden chest wrapped in oilcloth, his late wife's keepsake box. Inside were his old marshal's badge, a silver pocket watch, and a handful of cartridges. He strapped on the gun belt, feeling the weight settle around his hips like an old truth he'd been avoiding. "You were law," Simon said quietly. "Once," Eli replied, "till I learned the law bends for the man with deeper pockets." They heard the gunfire before they saw it. 3 sharp cracks echoing from the far ridge. Eli's heart seized. "Copper," he breathed, already moving. They followed the sound back toward the barn. Smoke rose against the pale sky, not from fire but from gunpowder. When they crested the hill, Eli spotted Copper standing in the open field, sides heaving. One rider lay motionless nearby. The other, Caleb, was dismounted, limping toward the horse with a drawn pistol. Eli raised the rifle. "Drop it, Caleb," he shouted. Caleb spun, surprise flashing across his face. You again? Damn fool, you just signed your death warrant. I've signed worse, Eli said, and fired. The bullet struck Caleb's hat clean off and buried itself in the snow behind him. The warning was clear. Caleb froze, panting. His pistol wavered. You think you can stop Rourke? He owns this valley. He owns you. Eli took a step closer. He owns cowards, not men. Caleb's eyes darted toward the barn, calculating distance. Before he could act, Copper reared, hooves slamming down inches from him. The pistol fell into the snow. Caleb turned and ran, disappearing into the line of trees. Eli lowered the rifle and rushed to Copper, who trembled from exhaustion. Easy now, he said, laying a hand against the horse's neck. You're all right. You did fine. Simon caught up, breath ragged, leaning on a fence post. You saved us both, he said hoarsely. He won't stop, Eli. Rourke will send more. Eli nodded. Then we'll be ready. But first, we take these. He gestured to the riders' saddlebags. Inside, they found papers, receipts, signed agreements, lists of names. Rourke's reach written in ink. Simon's eyes widened as he flipped through them. These are contracts for the land deeds. Some of these names, they're local. He's bought half the town. Eli stuffed the papers into his coat. Then the town deserves to see them. The first light of sunrise broke over the hills, spilling gold across the snow. For a brief moment, it looked like the valley was whole again, clean, untouched. But Eli knew better. Beneath that beauty, the ground was poisoned, and so were the hearts of men who'd sold it. He looked at Simon, then at Copper, who stood tall despite the wound on his flank. We're done hiding, he said. Time to make Rourke see what he's buried. Somewhere far off, a bell tolled from the town's small chapel, 3 slow chimes that rolled through the valley like a warning. Eli turned toward the sound, shoulders squared, rifle slung over his back. For the first time in years, he felt the weight of purpose return. The bell from the chapel echoed through the crisp morning air, hollow and distant. But to him it was a signal, a reminder that Pine Hollow wasn't dead yet. Somewhere out there were people who still believed in right and wrong, even if fear had made them quiet. He tightened the saddle straps on Copper, whose breath rolled out in white plumes, and looked back at Simon. The younger man sat on a crate near the barn door, face pale but resolve in his eyes. His arm was bound tight, the sling freshly adjusted by Clara before she rode off. You sure about going to town? Simon asked. If we wait, Rourke wins, Eli said. The valley's his for the taking. Then at least let me come. You can barely stand. Doesn't mean I can't shoot. Eli almost smiled. You'll get your chance, but not today. I need you alive to tell folks what Rourke's done. He slipped the canister of negatives from his coat and pressed it into Simon's hand. Hide it, deep. If I don't make it back, you get this to Clara. She'll know who can use it. Simon stared at him, reluctant, then nodded. What are you going to do? Eli looked toward the far ridge where a smear of black smoke drifted above the tree line. Find out who Rourke sends to burn what he can't buy. By mid-morning, the storm had passed, leaving a pale sun over a landscape carved in white and shadow. The air smelled of pine pitch and distant fire. As Eli guided Copper up the slope, the valley spread out below like a painting in frost. His barn, the line of the creek, and beyond that, the smelter hill, now coughing smoke through the thinning air.